Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Ketubot daf Mem Gimel. We are already at the top of daf Mem Gimel. And we are going to, yesterday, we saw that the father gets any money his daughter earns until she becomes an adult. And so we're going to begin now with the question of what happens if the father has passed away and the daughter is being supported by her brothers who inherited the father's estate. And the rule is, by the way, that the brothers who inherit the father's estate need to support the daughter until she gets married. And so the question is what happens to her earnings? Do they go to her or do they go to the brothers? So that's going to be our question as we begin. Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, third to the last word on the sixth line down. So Boy Mine Rebbe Avina Mirav Sheshes. Rav Avina asked Rav Sheshes, Bas Hanizonis Min Ha'ach. If you have this daughter who is being fed from the brothers, by the brothers, who's being supported by the brothers. Now, again, just to be clear, that support from the brothers is from the father's estate. But they have to support her from whatever assets the estate has. So, Maziya Dehalami, who gets the earnings that she has? B'makom av kaime, do we say that the brothers are standing in the place of their father? And so as a result, that therefore, just as her efforts, the produce of her hands goes to the father, so too it will now go to the brothers. O Dilma, or do we say lo dami la'ab? It's not comparable to the father because hasam mididei mitzvah. Right, the father. It was the father's own possessions that he was using to feed his daughter. But hacha lav medidhu mitzvah. They're not really feeding him from their own stuff. They're feeding them from the things that belong to the father. And so, as a result, that's the point. So we'll take a look at Rashi. Rashi 3 lines down in the narrow lines. Almana nizonos menichse yisomim. Right, so we have again this this widow. 1 second, hold on a second. I'm sorry, that's the next item. That's the next piece. So, but Tosos here notes at the very beginning of the first regular print Tosos. So Batani Zonas min ha'achim masa yedeha lemi. So mid de oraisa, Tosos says pshita le dehavi la'atzma. It's clear that actually from a biblical perspective, it would go to her, and that the only question is kedarshin and lekaman, as we'll end up saying later on. But the question is whether, from the rabbinic perspective, that is the perspective that we're asking. So, okay, and now the Rav Sheshes responds, Amar Le, Tanisua, we have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that we'll learn in another month and a half or so on Daf Tzadik Hey Amabet, where it says, Almana nizones mi'nichse yisomim u'masi yadah shalahen. Right, so the widow is supported from the possessions of the estate, and that is, and therefore from the orphans, and they get her earnings. So when it comes to a widow, it's perfectly clear what the answer is, that it's going to be that the widow's work does go to the children, to the sons that the man left behind. And Rashi explains, now we get to that Rashi that I realized I was trying to read a little early. So 3 lines down in the narrow lines, Almana nizonos b'nichse yisomim, dahai nami tanai ksuvahu, right? That this also is a condition of the ketubah, right? Bepirkin atehe yatva bebeti umitzana menichsai kol yemei migar amar nosayach, right? That I agree in the ksuba, the woman has promised that the man has promised that as long as she remains a widow, the money will go to his estate will continue to support her in her widowhood as long as necessary. And so as a result, that's a condition of the estate. And yet we say, so there's this separate obligation, and yet we say that the earnings go to the orphans. So too, I would think that the earnings should go to the brothers. So midame, are these cases really comparable, where the question is about what happens to the wife's earnings versus what happens to the daughter's earnings? Almanaso lo nichale baharbacha. Maybe the husband is not so concerned about his widow's profit, but bito nichale baharbacha. But with his daughter, he wants her to be able to retain her earnings, meaning that we naturally have a greater affinity for our children than for our spouse, especially after we pass. So lememra devito adifa lema almanaso. And 1 second, but are you going now? That suggests that we again have a preference that to the daughter over the widow. But is that really true? We have another statement. Amar Rabbi Yaba, Amar Rabbi Yossi, asu almana etzel habas, that a widow compared to the daughter is kibas etzel achen, is like a daughter compared to the brothers. And what do we mean by that? Ma base abas benechasin muatin. When it comes to situations where there is relatively little in the way of property. Ma bas etzel achen. When it comes to the daughter compared to the brothers, what does that mean? Habas nizonis, that the daughter will take food first. And if somebody needs to beg, it's going to be the brothers. But af almana etzel abbas. We have the same principle with respect to a widow compared to the daughter, meaning almana nizonis, the widow gets fed, babas tishal hapsachim, and the daughter goes around and begs. So what do we see from this statement? We see from this statement that the daughter is less preferred than the widow. But we had just said that maybe the exact opposite, that maybe the daughter is preferred to the widow. So how do you explain these two things? Aren't we now showing that in fact Rav Shesh's statement is accurate and that we can learn from a widow to the case of the daughter? So no, the Gemara explains le'inyan zilusa almana adifale. When it comes to degradation and the concern about the respect being shown for the widow, so then the man is going to prefer his widow. He does not want his widow to go around begging. But le'inyan harbacha, but when it comes to the additional profits and making sure that she's successful, bito adifale, then he's worried about his daughter. That on some level, that when it comes to making sure that there's a baseline, he's going to start with his widow, but then once you reach the baseline, then he's going to favor the daughter. No idea if this is really true, but it does seem to sound to resonate on some. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think it does differ from family to family. But in any event, the point that we're trying to make is that Rav Sheshes, you have not successfully proven your case. It doesn't necessarily mean that the daughter's profits go to the brothers. So Masiv Rav Yosef challenges. Maza Yadao Mitziyasa. So now we're going to try and say, right? We have not, again, while we haven't addressed the question, the Gemara goes now further and says that maybe the proof is actually in the opposite direction of Rav Sheshes. So let's see how Rav Yosef does that. So Masiv Rav Yosef, Ma'isa Yadao Mitziyasa. we have our Mishnah where it said that her earnings and what she finds, av al pisha lo gavsa, even though she hasn't taken them yet. Mesa av harei hein shalachin. That shows that, and if the father dies, they go to the brothers. Taima de b'chaye ha'av. What's the reason? Because they were earned during the father's lifetime. What's the implication? Hala achar misas ha'av la'atzma. The implication is that anytime after she earns something after her father passes away, they all go to her. So my lav ben izonis, wouldn't we assume that our Mishnah is talking about where the daughter is fed and supported by the brothers? So of course the response is low. No, you don't have to make that assumption. We could say that she's not being supported. Well, 1 second. If you're saying that she's not being supported, why in the world would you even need to say this in our Mishnah? What would we even think that it wouldn't go to her? Even according to the opinion that says that you can tell a slave, listen, you're going to work for me, a non-Jewish slave, you're going to work for me, but I'm not going to feed you, so tough luck. Because it's a non-Jewish slave, you own them. You would literally own them. So hani mili be'eved kanani. That's only true when it comes to a non-Jewish slave. Duloksiv be'imach, because there's no aspect of with you in connection with it, and that's a pasuk that it says, in connection with a Jewish slave. Aval eved ivri diksiv be'imach. But when it comes to a Jewish slave, where it does say that for it is good for him with you, right? Lo, you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to tell them. The culture came veto, certainly you wouldn't be allowed to tell that to your daughter. So the point is that you're not allowed to say to your daughter, you have to work for yourself and any of your profits come to me. So, that is not what we're allowed to say. Indeed, that's the whole point of the father has to support his daughter. And so given the fact that we can't have somebody say, work for me and support yourself, clearly if she is at a stage where she's supporting herself, right, and that's what we're assuming, b'she'ein and izonis, she's not being supported by the brothers, certainly the father doesn't get it. Well, of course the brothers aren't going to get it. So what's the point of even making this statement? Why do we need to tell us this in the Mishnah? So Amar Rabba Bar Ula lo nitzrucha el ha'adafa. No, the point is that you're absolutely right that when a daughter works for herself, that she is going to be able to use the initial proceeds of her earnings in order to pay for and to buy herself food. But what about the extra? What about after she's taken care of all her needs? Then what happens with that additional money? The answer is that when it comes to the father, if the father and the daughter agree that the daughter is going to use her own earnings because she's very smart and she is able to, make a good living on her own. And so they reach an agreement and they realize that, look, it makes more sense for you to work for yourself than for me to try and support you. The father is still entitled to anything extra that she earns over and above her ability to support herself. So while she is a minor, and I think also while she's a na'ara. So the point is that as a result, that's what we're telling, that even though the father is entitled to these extra earnings, and maybe you might think that they also get inherited by the brothers, the answer is that they're not getting inherited by the brothers. So now we're going to say, so that was again an effort number one of Rav Yosef to try and challenge Rav Sheshes. But Rava is now going to say, we must have understood this answer that we just gave is too obvious to Rav Yosef's challenge. So let's try and figure out a different understanding of Rav Yosef. So Amar Rava, Gaver Rava ki Rav Yosef, lo yada deika ha'adafa. Of course, Rav Yosef would know about surplus earnings. Of course, he knows that. So it can't be that was what his question was all about. The kimosiv tiyuvta, and yet he was trying to present a challenge. Of course, he must have understood something different. So Ella Amarava Rav Yosef Masnisin Gufa Kashile. No, Rav Yosef began his point by highlighting something that's odd in our Mishnah, and you probably noticed it and just didn't want to ask. Dikatani Masa Yada Umitsiasa Apa Pisha Lo Gavsa. When it comes to her earnings and what she finds, even though she hasn't collected them. Well, 1 second. Mitsiasa Miman Gavya. What does it mean? Who is she going to collect what she found? If it's something that she found, it's by definition already collected, because whoever, it's not who sees it first, it's who grabs it first. So it's not her finding until she actually grabs it. So why is this? Why are we even saying anything about collecting something that is found? So Elalav Hachikamer. So as a result, Rav Yosef is highlighting to us that this is what the Mishnah is intending. Masayadeha kimitziasa. That what she earns is like what she finds. Mamitziasa b'chayeha av la'av. That what she finds when her father is alive goes to the father. La'achar misas ha'av la'atzma. And after her father dies, what she finds goes to her. So too, when it comes to what she earns while her father is alive goes to the father. What she earns after the father dies goes to her and not to her brothers. So as a result, hello, come on in. Shma mina. So as a result, in fact, we seem to have learned a good proof that today's story is the following. A daughter whose father has unfortunately passed away, and now she's being supported by the brothers, okay, because her brothers are taking care of her, which sounds a little familiar, right? You're a brother that takes care of your sister, right? Yeah. So the question is when the sister earns some money, do the brothers get to take that money, or does the sister get to keep that money? That's the question. It's a good question, right? It's a good question. So that we're saying now that the sister gets to keep the money. So that's what we're saying right now. So Itmar Nami, and now we're going to have a supporting statement along those lines. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Bas Hanizonis Mina Achen. If we have a daughter who is being fed by the brothers, meaning from the estate of the father, Masa Yadeha La'atzma, she gets to keep the earnings. So Amar Rav Kahana, my time. So Rav Kahana wants to know, what's the reason for this ruling? Meaning, what's the source for this concept? Diksiv v'hit nachaltem osam levnechem acharechem. The idea is that this is from Vayikra Kaf Hey Pasuk Mem Vav, that the references to sons inheriting non-Jewish slaves. So osam livnechem. The inheritance of the non-Jewish slave goes to your children. But the rights that you have to your daughter do not go to your children. So this teaches that you can't inherit the rights to the daughter from the father can't inherit the rights to the daughter. So next. So Maskif la Rabba. So Rabba now asks a question. How do we know that this teaching about the rights to the daughter not being inheritable applies to every right of the daughter? Maybe it's just certain penalty rights and the rights associated with our halachot that we're dealing with of a daughter who is violated or a daughter who is seduced, right? So
what do you mean inheritable? What's it inheritable meaning? If she dies, like I don't.
No, inheritable from the father, meaning that the father had the rights while he was alive.
I see.
And so maybe the sons of the father will inherit these same rights.
The right inheritable. Okay, I got it.
Okay. The right itself is the inheritable object. Absolutely. Thank you for
that's kind of like a strange concept that we're not talking about property that's inheritable, but the right to the property.
That's exactly right. The right to some future development. That's exactly right. And you're absolutely right. Then in general, we say we don't allow the contracting of that. So it makes a lot of sense that we wouldn't allow the inheriting of that. So So and the second other rights, so the rights associated with the penalties, the fines, and maybe the rights associated with a bodily injury, meaning the damage, the pain and suffering associated with it. Tana Rav Chanina, and this is in fact was taught by Rav Chanina. That Rav Chanina actually says that the rights that are not inheritable are in fact only the rights that are associated with the fines and bodily injury, meaning that the rights associated with the work, the profits, would be inheritable, meaning that if the brothers are supporting the daughter from the father's estate, so then the brothers do inherit the right to the work profits of the daughter. Okay, and of course we're talking about while the daughter is still a younger child, so that the father would be entitled to those rights. So chavalos tzara begufa ninhu. Well, 1 second. A bodily injury, right? That's personal pain. And let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi helps us understand this question. Sara deguvahu, v'tzara lo zachi le rachmana la'av. 1 second. How can you say, right? Rav Chanina was just saying that the bodily injury is something that is not inheritable. Well, what's the implication of that? It means that the father gets the bodily injury. But that isn't true, because Kedetanya Ba'achobel in Baba Kama Daf Pei Zayin Mabed, we say Bibno Vito Haketanim Yasa Lahem Segula, that when you have a bodily injury for a child, there's a requirement to essentially set up a trust. And so as a result, I gotta send this one out. Okay, so the idea is that this concept of a trust suggests that it's the profits associated, or the money associated with bodily injury does not go to the father, it goes to the child. So what does it mean? It goes exactly in a trust until the child becomes an adult. So what does it mean that Rav Chanina is saying that the bodily injury is not inheritable? The father doesn't get it in the first place. So I'm Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, as we turn to Mem Gimel Amabet, it's a case where she was wounded in her face. So the situation is the following. It is not for the bodily injury per se, but rather it is for the diminution in value. As we take a look in the top Rashi, in the top Rashi, so Shepatz Abivaneha, Mikaspa, that it reduces the value. The Isa La'av Dilehu, that he would get if he were to sell her. Daha Yesh Lo Ba'mecher, because he has the right to effectively sell his minor daughter, and that's what we're talking about. So that is what we're talking about. That's the right that Rabbi Chanina, Rav Chanina is saying is not inheritable. So now we have two different views. One that says Rav Shesh's view, that says that the brothers do not get. One is Rav Shesh's view, which is consistent with the view of Rav Chanina, which is that the brothers inherit this right. And we have Rav Yosef's view that says that no, the brothers do not get the right. So those are the two views that we've got right now. And now let's come to the conclusion about what we say. So Amar Rav Zera, Amar Rav Masna, Amar Rav. So we said in the name of Rav. But Amrila, Amar Rebbe Zera, Amar Rav Masna, Amar Rav. And there's a debate: is Rav Zera and Rebbe Zera the same person? Just one was in Eretz Yisrael and one was in Babel, meaning how at what point in his life? Because the term Rebbe was, indicates some indication of smicha, and so as a result, that's the question. Or according to Tosfos, Rav Zera and Rebbe Zera are two different people. But in any event, somebody said in the name of Rav, Bas hanizonos mina achim. If you have a daughter that is supported from the estate, inherited by the brothers, so Masa Yadel Atzma, she gets to keep it. Again, the same pasuk that we just cited, Osam libnechem, The Canaanite slaves, they get inherited below beno sechem livnechem, but your daughters do not get inherited by your sons. So magid she'ein adam morish zechus pito livno, right? You don't get to inherit the rights to the daughters don't get inherited by the brothers. So Amar le Avimi bar Papi. Avimi bar Papi says Shakud Amra. The person who was diligent was the one who said this. Shakud Manu, who is the diligent one? Shmuel. It was Shmuel. Well, 1 second. Harab Amra. But I don't understand. Avimi Bar Papi just said that it was Shmuel. Well, Shmuel and Rav often argue, and we just said that it was Rav who said it. So Ema Af Shakud Amra. So really, actually, what it means is that even Shmuel was the one who said it. So in fact, Amar Mar Bar Amemar L'Ravashi. Mar Bar Amemar said, Hachi Amri Nardai. The people in Narda say the following: Hilchasa Kavase to Rav Sheshes, that the halacha is like Rav Sheshes, meaning the brothers do inherit. Ravashi Amar Ravashi said back, no, Hilchasa Kavase to Rav. No, in fact, the halacha is like Rav, and the Gemara concludes the Hilchasa Kavase to Rav. In fact, the halacha is like Rav, and so the sister gets to keep what she earns, even though the wife, right, the widow, does not get to keep. We're going to see that in a Mishnah in a month and a half. We'll see that. So, all right. So now that finished the Gemara, and now we're ready for the next Mishnah. So the next Mishnah addresses the rights to the father in a ketubah depending on the level of marriage, meaning that the father's rights in his daughter continue until either the daughter reaches the age of Bogeret, that's 12 and a half, assuming normal maturization, normal bodily maturization, or when the daughter becomes fully married, does not just erisin, but also nisuin to her husband. So now let's take a look and see what the next Mishnah says. So Hamaris is
question, Dave.
please.
I'm sorry, just to go back for a second.
No worries, absolutely.
So smicha is, if you have smicha was in Eretz Yisrael and not in Bavel, right?
Yep.
Therefore, they call those people Rav or Rabbi?
No, that would be Rabbi. Rebbe would be the smicha version.
Okay. Is there something in the name that tells you that that's smicha, or what's the?
I think that's the formal title. Like Rav is just a more of a master kind of title. In fact, we just had where Rebbe is sort of has a greater sense. But I don't know sort of like from an etymological perspective.
So Rav is Bavel and Rebbe is Eretz Yisrael.
Correct. That is certainly what the note here indicates, and I think that Rashi says something along those lines here as well.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Just see. Yeah, you can take a look in the Rashi second line down in at very top of the daf. Hu Rabbi Zera, hu Rav Zera, Ela beBavel mikmei desulik ala Arid Yisrael. That when he was in Bavel, it was before he got to Eretz Yisrael. La kamei de Rabbi Yochanan, and he came in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Ve'ein smicha beBavel, and there was no smicha beBavel havu. So havu karolei Rav Zera. So that's why they called him Rav Zera. Ubahash Maisa Ikalamanda Amar Mikme Dismuchahu Amra. Some people said it was said before he got smicha, the Ikalamanda Amar Bazar Dismuchahu Amra, and some people say it was after he got smicha. So that is the explanation, as I said in Rashi. So let me just actually write that down. Okay, so now in the next Mishnah, we go with Ma'aras Esbito. Somebody has his daughter do Erisin. So he marries off his daughter, his minor daughter, the Gersha, and then she gets divorced before Nisuin. It's very important that Nisuin never happened. So they didn't do both stages of the marriage. Erisa, then he did it again. The father gave away his daughter again in marriage. Armala, and then unfortunately the husband again before Nisuin, now he dies. So Ksubasa, what? Well, unfortunately, in those days, people died at a very young age, so hard to be sure, but probably some kind of sickness.
It's the same girl?
Yes, same girl, absolutely, same girl. And now what the Gemara, what the Mishnah is telling us is ksubasa shalo, the ksuba that she gets from each of these marriages, because whether you divorce, one divorces his wife, or one dies and leaves one's wife as a widow, the in both cases, the ksuba obligation kicks in, and that is what is owed.
How old is she here?
Where they didn't go to the second stage of marriage?
Excellent question. This is assuming we're going to, that this is assuming, in fact, we can take a look at that Rashi. Good question. So let's do this right. We're first Rashi in the Mishnah. Ksuba sashel ab, ksuba shehi gova mishnei erusin. So first of all, let's clarify that we're talking about both ksubas from both erusin. So halalu v'kasavar, and this is according to the opinion, yesh ksuba la'arusa. It's a very important concept because it's not necessarily clear that an arusa gets a ksuba, but we're assuming that that's who it is. And we're talking about while the daughter was still a na'ara or a ketana, so that obviously the in earnings of the daughter go to the father, and so that is why she's going to be entitled. He is going to be entitled to both of her ksubas.
So if she was a grown woman, whatever, over.
If she was a bogeret, she would not be. And indeed, yes, that's correct. She was bogeret. Definitely nothing goes to the father. In fact, we're going to see that during the course of the Gemara.
She would get the ketubah.
Yes, absolutely. That's what it's there for.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah, but I mean, we're just talking. We just had the erusin. We didn't have the.
Correct. We did not have Nisuin. So now we're going to deal with the second case. So that's exactly what we're going to deal with next. So now Hesia, he gave her over in Nisuin, V'nis Armala, and she, Hesia, the Gerisha, he gave her over in Nisuin, and she was divorced. Hesia, and then it happened again, and V'nis Armala. And by the way, actually, the commentaries note that the second time he does that, he really isn't entitled to. He doesn't, once she marries, she is like her own owner. So he does not have that right once she goes through Nisuin. But in any event, the second marriage also happens. And the second time she was widowed. Ksuba sashala, the ksuba that's associated with both marriages go to her. As Rashi says, take a look back into the Mishnah in Rashi. Now the second Rashi in the Mishnah. Once she gets married, once she does Nisuim, Paka'a Rishuso, his property rights in her, his jurisdiction over her ends. Ubasar Govaina Azlinan. And we follow the moment of collection, right? Because you might have thought? You might have thought that, no, we follow the moment that the contract is written. And at the moment that the contract was written, that was before they were married. And so as a result, she was in her father's house. And so now we're going to say, no, it goes based on when she does the collection. The Govina, Basar Hachihau. And when is she doing the collecting? She's doing the collecting after she entered the full-fledged marriage. And so as a result, it would all belong to her. Below Azlina Basar Ksiba. We don't follow the time of the contract of the ksuba being written. Lomar Hoil v'harishona nichtava ba'oda b'rshus ha'av tihavidav. And say that because it was written before she left the father's household, it would still belong to the father. And indeed, that's going to be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, as we'll see. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, as we go back to the Mishnah, Harishona shel av, the father actually gets the first ksuba. So Amru lo, Meshehesia ein labi a rishusba. And the rabbis who are the Tanakama, they say back to Rabbi Yehuda, I don't understand. The father has no jurisdiction over her. The father she's left her father's property. So why should they get it? So that is our Mishnah. So now the Gemara is going to note that it's interesting that neither case involved double death, right? It wasn't two widowhoods. And why was that the case? Taima de Hesia v'Gersha Hesia v'Nisarmala. it seems, why is it that the Mishnah specifically told us a case of divorce followed by widowhood, and not two cases of widowhood directly? It's in Aval Nisarmala Trey Zimne, because if in fact she had been widowed 2 times, tu lo hachazya le'inusube, she would no longer be allowed to marry. This is something that we saw in Yevamot, that there's this idea of basically a black widow, right? A black widow. Both the movie and the reputation means that a woman whose husband seemed to die, that we seem to have that concept in Judaism. And so agav orche kasasim lan tana karebi. And so as a result, they're telling us that at least this anonymous Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Because what does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi say? The Amar betrays Zimne Havya Chazaka. Unlike Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that, and this is often how we paskin, that you need 3 times for there to be a chazaka. When it comes to this situation, Rebbe, and more generally, Rebbe says, no, 2 times is a chazaka. And so as a result, if a woman's husband were to die in 2 consecutive marriages, so then we would say that that she's not able to get married. And again, if I remember correctly, that where we have an explanation for the death, so maybe we won't actually apply this. But okay,
This doesn't make any sense.
say more.
We're not talking about a 3rd marriage. We're talking about 2 marriages, right?
Correct. The Gemara is asking, why did our Mishnah choose divorce followed by widow, as opposed to?
But it's only 2 cases.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and the point is that what it's trying to say, and it doesn't dispute this, even though I understand your point and really agree with you that on some level, it's not like it ever says the straight out rule. So it's hard to say, but basically the Gemara is explaining that the Mishnah chose this and chose not to say the double widow case, because if it had been a double widow case, then the Gemara would have the Mishnah would have had to tell us that she can't get married. The fact that it didn't tell us that tells us that she's allowed to get married again, because it's a widowhood, and it's a divorce and a widowhood.
That doesn't make any sense. I mean, because that's not the case. We're not talking about whether she could get married a 3rd time. We're just talking about the ketubah and what happens the 2nd time, not the 3rd time. But all right, I see. I hear what you're saying. You know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I understand your point.
After the first husband dies, there's no chazaka. Everybody agrees.
Everybody agrees there's no chazaka. So that's why she's allowed to get married, right? So she would, if she would be allowed to do 2 nisarmalas, but then we would want to have said that she can't do a 3rd. So the fact that we chose to give a case that only involves 2 actions, I totally hear you. I understand that this doesn't feel like a great proof, because what would be a great proof is if there were 3 cases, right? Yeah, 100%. And if we chose to do like divorce, death, divorce, right, in those 3 cases,
or
then
or the other, death, divorce, death.
Oh yeah, or maybe even death, divorce, death. I don't know whether that would. Yeah, probably that would be not. Well, the question is just confirming that would not be a chazaka. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you that if in fact death, divorce, death, that would be a better proof, 100%. Okay, all right. So now we're going to look into Rav Yehuda's opinion in the Mishnah. So, and try to understand what his opinion is. And of course, Rashi already hinted indirectly to his opinion when he explained why the first opinion says that the Tanakama says that the daughter gets the ksuba when we're talking about Nisuin. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer Harishuna Shalab. My time of the Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda? Rabba v'Rav Yosef the Amri Tarvayu. That since the father got the rights to the ksuva at the moment that she actually does erisin, so that is why she is entitled. The father is entitled to the ksuba rights from the first wedding. So Masiv Rabba asked, 1 second, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Harishona Shel Av, Umoda Rabbi Yehuda b'ma'ares espito kashehi katana, uvagra ba'achar kach nisis she'ein la bia rishusba. Amai. So 1 second, the Rabbi Yehuda also admits that if the woman does erisin while she's a minor, and then only does nisuin when she's a bogeret, so they had at least a 6-month engagement, and so as a result, that when she becomes married, she doesn't have jurisdiction. But haka nami lema hoel mishas erisin zacha bahen ha'av. If we take a look again, Rabba and Rav Yosef said it's Mishas Erisin Zacha, that at the moment of Erisin he's entitled. So if in fact the Erisin happened while she was still a minor or a Na'ara, he should have the rights to it. So that it can't be that Rabbi Yehuda, that their statement of Rabba and Rav Yosef is accurate, because Rabbi Yehuda specifically says that in fact if she does Nisuin after she becomes a Bogeris, it doesn't make a difference when the Erisin happened. We won't follow it. So Amai, Hakanami Lema, Hoel Mishas Erisin Zacha Bahena Ab. Let the father inherit, because at that moment of Erisin, the father was still in his possession. She was still in his jurisdiction. Ela Iyanmar Hachanimar. So rather, what Rav Yosef and Rabba were saying was the following. Rabba Rav Yosef to Armi Tarvayu, Hoel Ivershuso Nichtavin. The question is, when was the ksuba written? And so that, of course, was the source of Rashi's comment earlier. And so we follow. And so as a result, because the ksuba was written while she was still part of the father's estate, part of the father's property, so as a result, property is probably not a great word. Like I think that they use the word here jurisdiction, so that's a better word. So that part of the property, although the Vershuso sounds like more property than jurisdiction, but in any event, Vershuso in his jurisdiction. So as a result, that is why he is entitled to it. So now the Gemara is going to.
So I mean, it's basically the father has a financial incentive to marry his daughter off before she turns,
12 and a half, correct. That's exactly
even if they're not going to get actually married, for a year or something like that, it's like he's getting, right?
Correct. Well, I mean, the question is when do you actually write the ksuba? So that's a question that we're going to. But if the ksuba is written after she's a bogeret, so then it won't follow that according to Rebbe.
That's why he's got the incentive to get it done.
Get the whole thing done.
The ksuba was part of the.
Generally, it was actually written at the time of the nisuin, and we'll see now. We're going to see right now the ramifications of it. Very interesting question. Really, an interesting question about the timing of liens. So. Here we go with a little bit on the timing of liens, and with that we'll finish for the day. So umigma me'emes gavia. So when you are going to claim, what rights do you have to claim? So let's just remind ourselves the fact that when the husband divorces his wife, or when the husband dies, and now the wife is collecting the ksuba, she does not only have rights to what he owns right now. If he sold property between the time that the ksuba was written and when the collection happens, those properties can be collected from. It's as if there was a mortgage on the property, and so it was sold subject to the mortgage, okay? Because everybody knows that though there's a wife involved, the wife involved means that there's a ksuba. Ksuba involved means that there's a written lien on the property. Okay, so now we're going to follow that. So that's the question. So how far back? So Rav Amar Rav Huna, Mana Masayim, the first 100. That's the base. That's the minimum requirement that the rabbis require. Minha Erisin. Rav Huna says that because that's the minimum amount, you're allowed to collect that based on the date of Erisin, even though the final written contract is not until the time of the Nisuin. You're allowed to go back at that moment and collect from then. The Tosefes, whatever's added to it, and in fact, we double everything in our day. We double the 100 and double the 200, 200 for a virgin, 100 for somebody who's been married already. Tosefes min nesuin. And when whatever's extra, that can be collected based on the date of the actual nesuin. The Rav Asi Amar, no. Rav Asi disagrees. He says everything gets collected from the date of essentially of the nesuin. That's the date of the underlying real contract, and so that's the date that we're going to collect from. Umi Amar Rav Huna Hachi. Now, did Rav Huna really say that you can only collect from the date of that you could collect some from the date of Erisin and some from the date of nesuin? Va'idmar. If a woman has two ketubot, one that says 200 and one that says 300, but Amar Rav Huna, what did Rav Huna say in that case? If she wants to collect from the 200, she could collect from the earlier date. Shalosh meot. If she wants to collect from the 300, gova mizman sheni. Then she collects from the second one, meaning that there will be times where she might prefer $200 with the rights to go back earlier to earlier property than $300 from the lack of the ability to go back to earlier property. Because if in fact all the good property was sold between the first writing and the second writing, she might not be able to collect any of the 300. And so as a result, she might prefer to have the right to a certain right to collect 200 over an uncertain right to collect 300.
Bird in the hand.
What?
Bird in the hand.
Bird in the hand, absolutely. But 1 second.
How could she have two ketubot?
Yeah, the husband wrote 2 ketubot for her. And we're going to explain that in just a moment. So 1 second, but if in fact Rav Huna says that you can collect the 100, the basic amount, 100 or 200 from the time of the Erisin, why not say, Tigbabe Masayim Mizman Rishon, let her collect 200 from the time of the first ksuba, Umeya Mizman Sheni, and then let her collect the third 100 from the time of the second ksuba. So now the Gemara is going to explain. That doesn't work because litamech tigbe chamesh meot kulam. Why not let her, according to your reasoning, let her collect? Why doesn't Rav Huna just say that she could collect all 500? Ma'asayim mizman rishon plus meya mizman sheni. Let her collect 200 from the time of the first contract and 300 from the time of the second contract. Ela chamesh meos my time lo gabi. What is the reason that we're not allowing her to collect all 500? Kaven de lo kasavla sivisi v'osipis loch tlas meya amasayim. Because the second contract does not say that it is intended to be an additional $300. It's intended to be separate. It's intended to be alternative. So this is what he's saying by not saying explicitly that this is in an addition. It says what he's telling her, imizman rishon gavyat gavi masayim. If you want to do so, you can collect 200 from the earlier contract. Imizman sheni gavis gavi plus meya. If you want to collect from the second one, you can collect from the second one 300. So hachinami taima delo gavya. So again, the reason that we're not going to let her do 200 from the first date and 100 from the second date is because that wasn't the intention. Midilo kasav ostifis lach meyam amasayim. He never wrote that I'm adding you 100 to the 200. Rather, he wrote the first contract was 200, the second contract was 300. They're completely independent. So the implication that we're going to follow is that the intention is that you could do one or the other, but not that you could do both. So that's kasavla, right? So achuli achilte lishibuda kama, right? That the point is that if he's going to collect from the second one, she's supposed to abandon the first one. And so that is the intention. And so as a result, we now have the two statements. We have Rav Huna, who says that you collect 100 or 200, the base amount of the ksuva from the Erisin, you collect the extra from the time of the Nesuin. Rav Asi says you collect it all from the time of the Nesuin. And if you want to see how the Gemara concludes, that be here tomorrow. Exactly. And tomorrow also, we're going to now turn to the case of a woman whose husband bring witnesses to say that she was with another man between Irisin and Nisuin. That's going to be the Mishnah that we will deal with, God willing, tomorrow.
Couldn't you say that I mean, I don't know how this works. I mean, but couldn't you say that the second ketubah supersedes the first one or something, or invalidates?
You could, but I would argue that the language doesn't say that this replaces it. So I think that
Well, what happens if somebody in modern law, you were a lawyer, somebody has two contracts for the same, how do you enforce, which terms do you enforce, or is it accumulate,
That's a good question. I mean, obviously you're absolutely right that often we would just say that the second terms, it must be that the first one was abrogated or intended.
It's implied. Why would you have a second one?
Right.
If wouldn't it be implied that it would be
so I would argue that in
like
this
a codicil to the
correct. I would argue that what makes this case unique is the lien aspect of it. And so as a result, because of the lien aspect of it, it's so that's the story. It's the lien aspect that is making this unique.
So you could say that, like on a property, you can have two liens on a property.
Correct. You can have two liens on a property based on different dates, and so or two liens on a person's estate based on different dates. And because that matters, because sometimes you might prefer the first to the second, so that's why they're going to view it more as alternatives. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.